Hello and welcome to another episode of Swedenborg Room. I'm the Reverend Thom Muller, senior editor of Our Daily Bread, Sermons and Meditations from the Swedenborgian Church of North America. We have a special episode today. We'll be talking with the amazing Michael Robbins, who is pursuing a relatively new form of online engagement of Swedenborg called Crosshatched, a wonderful podcast that he started. And why don't we just go ahead and quickly introduce both Mr. Rudy, who many of you know, and Michael. Rudy, you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I'm Rudy Caseres. I'm the co-host for this wonderful podcast, episode 5 already. My has time flown. But yes, I'm just some guy. I sit under the learning tree of Reverend Thom Muller, who's a great guy overall. And I'm excited because I get to sit under second learning tree. We got a whole garden plot going on here. So I am a seedling that is slowly sprouting, and someday I'll be my own tree, and I'll have others sitting below it. That's all.
I think you're already a tree.
Thank you.
That's a wonderful metaphor considering your proximity to the garden church. It has been so fun to see the success of the garden church over, 10 years, 15 years?
We just did 11 years.
11. Wow. Yeah, so I'm Michael Robbins. I'm up in the Seattle area. I am the president of the Swedenborgian spiritual community of Puget Sound, and I am also the host of Crosshatched, which started earlier this year.
Thank you so much. I figured we'd just kind of go right into it, and I think it's going to be Michael doing most of the speaking today, I hope. And kind
Not
of
me.
maybe, or you, that's cool too. I'm recovering from pneumonia still, so my voice is not the prettiest. But Michael, if you want to just kind of maybe start by giving us a little bit more info about your background, what led you to this point where you're doing this podcast? What's your journey with Swedenborg and Swedenborgianism, and how did you end up doing this?
Yeah. I mean, it's really delightful to have discovered a theology on my own accord. I wasn't introduced to it. I wasn't born to it. I, literally found these books of Swedenborg in the basement of the library in Boulder, Colorado around 1991, 92. And I was just fascinated by this, somewhat radical take on Christianity from someone who was, similar to me at the time, kind of having these out of body experiences. I couldn't get out of my own room, but apparently he was going to all the different planes and such. And it was maybe, 3 years later that I discovered there was a Swedenborgian church, which blew me away. And the first one I visited was the San Francisco church, and it was such a lovely feeling of coming home, right? I'd never been there before, but this beautiful garden and I think the overall emphasis on nature was so appealing. The fact that at the back of the chapel, instead of, some giant crucifix, it's a bird in a bird pond, right? That's the stained glass behind the pulpit. So simple and beautiful. And then I was visiting New York, and I was dragged to some Catholic mass, and so I get back to Boulder and I'm feeling really guilty, like, oh gosh, I should probably start going to church again, but there's not going to be a Swedenborgian church, and my car doesn't work. So I literally opened the yellow pages and I see Swedenborgian. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Even if this existed, it's got to be closed by now. Nope, it was like 10-minute walk up the street. So I got to go to that for about 6 months before I moved to New York City and started going to the Swedenborgian church there. And yeah, over the years, of course, visited Wayfarers, the San Diego church when that still existed, one or two in Australia. No, I think I hit 2 in Australia. Yeah, and probably a couple other places, but very happily ended up in Washington State. I really love it here. And we've gone through pretty substantial transformations since I arrived here in 2003. And I think, technically I've been president for a while, but now I'm kind of in a position to do something and really take the lead. But I'll tell you kind of the origin story of Crosshatch was about 10 years ago. I was at Mosswood Hollow with Reverend Paul Martin, and we're discussing the concept of salvation through faith alone, which is a pretty major distinction in Swedenborg theology versus kind of mainline Protestant. And it started to develop in the form of a script, almost a satire. And for those of you who don't get the context yet, Swedenborgian theology does not ascribe to salvation through faith alone. There are many Christian denominations that say all you need to do is say, I believe in Jesus, or believe in Jesus, or something of that nature. And it doesn't matter how horrible of a person you are. You're saved and you go to heaven, which I've always found preposterous. But you can't really blame them because there's a lot in the Bible written by Paul that's like faith, faith, faith. And so I wrote this satire, Heaven Crashers, and then like ultimately, hired some guy to do some animation. And yeah, it it was pretty low budget. I'm gonna be rehashing that.
I
Um,
remember this. This was awesome. Yeah, I remember talking about this too at the early stages.
right, yeah, yeah. And it's funny. The more that I delved into this concept, um, the more I started feeling like the um the notion, the philosophy, the propaganda of salvation through faith alone could actually be blasphemous. And if that's too strong of a word, then yeah, maybe just misled, because we're seeing more and more near-death experience videos, which are including atheists and non-Christians being welcomed by Jesus. And this is really no surprise to me, but yeah, I started thinking more about like, okay, if I was Jesus, and I was all love, and I just wanted people to love each other and be good to each other, and life is hard enough, and come on, guys, we can do it together. Um, and people started mischaracterizing me as a god who would throw people into eternal punishment and fire because they didn't believe in me or say that they knew me, and it has nothing to do with how they're living on earth, how they're treating people. Like, I would kind of feel like it was libelous or slanderous to be mischaracterizing me like that. And so, yeah, I believe that there is a Jesus, and that this Jesus in heaven is not penalizing people who weren't Christians or self-professed Christians. And, Jesus probably wants the story to get straight, wants people to get the story straight. And, and so, yeah, so that's kind of what led me to Crosshatch. I mean, I do cover a lot of different topics, but I would say this is a kind of a primary motivator for me, is to set the story straight and perhaps, get some folks who think that they can be hateful and spiteful and mean because, oh, I believe in Jesus, and, maybe rethink that.
I love that. That's really cool. And I find that that's broadly speaking, the reconciling of rationality and spirituality is something I hear a lot when people talk about finding Swedenborg. And of course, there's that interesting connection of him having been a natural scientist primarily, and then having these mystical experiences, and in many ways reconciling himself, that seeming tension between rational inquiry and, of course, he came from that very much a dogmatic Lutheran background where faith
Yeah.
alone did play a huge role for him. I was just wondering, or rather played a huge role for the people around him, and he was very much reacting against that. Um, I was just listening to you and looking at your cool banner. Where did the name idea come from for Crosshatched?
Thank you for asking. I have not mentioned that on any of my episodes yet. So when I was thinking of a name, I liked the names like Crossfire, Crosstalk, something that, shows the controversy, the tension, right? And I also, was noticing that the way that the Swedenborgian logo overlaps, it has a bit of that crosshatched motif, right? And then
Right.
finally, I kind of see it as an opportunity to expose people to a perspective of Christ, of the cross, that maybe they hadn't considered before. Maybe they've been drowned out through this false narrative of, oh, you got to believe in Jesus and that's the ticket. And yeah, for most people, it'd be like, well, that sounds dumb. That can't be right. And so that's kind of the third meaning, is to hatch the consideration and, possibly even the love of Christ and the cross from the perspective and the possibility that it actually does make sense. And, unfortunately, the message has been skewed, probably from Paul, and then through the propaganda that, I think does make a lot of sense from the perspective of um cultish recruitment. People who are involved in cults, there's a great emphasis on belief, right? You've got to believe this certain thing, and if you don't, oh well, you're out. And so um yeah, I've really just fallen in love with the Swedenborgian theology that demotes faith regularly. I mean, like every one of his books, he is like, no, it's not about that. Although I love that quote from Arcana Celesta. It's something like, um, charity wants to be with faith, right? Two sides of the same coin. Charity wants to be with faith as long as faith doesn't put itself first. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
um, by no means am I trying to, um, you know, eliminate or condemn faith. I think a problem is that that word is too small to capture everything. And one thing that, I mean, really deserves its whole episode, at least in one of his books, Swedenborg talks about the faith of angels. And you think, faith, why would an angel need faith? Like, you're in heaven, there's God. What? That doesn't make sense, right? But he said, oh, no, but the angels in the highest heaven, the celestial heaven, they don't need faith. They're like, what is faith? It's like telling me, oh, do you believe in that tree over there? Of course I do. I can see it. It's a tree. And so that got me thinking that there's a more expansive idea of faith that is really related to us releasing that ego, right? That identity. And the further we get along that path, right, just like those angels in the celestial heaven that have released themselves of that attachment to that identity so much to become so close to the Lord, which is why kind of they get on the other side of faith. But yeah, I thought that was a really amazing thing. Like, faith of angels. Why would angels need faith?
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. I'm thinking about the word faith, and you're right, he does use that word, right? The Latin word fide. And what I really appreciate about Swedenborg's approach there is that he kind of invites us to rethink what that concept means, right? I think the closest he ever comes to defining what he means by faith is the confirmation of something that is true. Whereas we tend to kind of in a Western Christian context, we tend to think of faith as believing something even though it doesn't make sense,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
And to Swedenborg, it's kind of the opposite, where he said true faith is believing something because it makes sense and because it is true. And I do think it comes a lot out of his own struggle of again looking at a lot of this religious mythology that we see in the Bible, and just as a natural scientist going, well, but I don't think this is true. And there's this experience where he goes, it is not human to believe something you don't understand. So there's that really beautiful way that he looks at the term faith in many ways in a very different way than most folks would, where it's precisely something that you arrive at because you're being truthful to your doubts, to
Love
your
that.
rational inquiry.
Yeah.
So
Right.
so that's I love that you're raising that up. And I wonder, so if faith alone is not the thing, what would you say is the alternative, practically speaking?
Yeah, practically speaking, love toward the neighbor, charity, being of use. I mean, these are the things that are, um, I think heavenly in nature. And, ultimately, like, if I can even inspire people who are harboring anger to let go of that anger, right? Just through community and understanding. It doesn't even have to be about religion or Swedenborg or Jesus or anything, right? Just to give some people that space, that love, that community, that understanding, because yeah, I have a I have a strong sense there's a lot of people in this country and around the world who are harboring a great deal of anger, and they feel that they have been wronged by life. Things haven't gone the way they've wanted, maybe they never go the way they've wanted, and and they feel very justified in having this anger and looking around. It seems like everybody else is doing okay. And why do all these bad things happen to me? And I think that's a very toxic way to live, carrying around anger, because it's going to come out in a lot of hostile ways. So that, I would say, is a secondary mission, which is just helping some people get through that resentment, anger that they're carrying, because it's not helping anyone.
That's excellent. That's excellent. That kind of leads me to a question that in a way you already kind of engaged, and I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on that. Is what is kind of your hope in terms of what happens when people engage with your content and with your ideas and discussing that and being exposed to that? Why do you think it's worth it? Why do you think it's worth bringing Swedenborg into that broader conversation around faith, around spiritual living, around out of body experiences, mystical
Yeah,
experiences?
right.
Where do you find the treasure in bringing that into the sort of communal space of discussion?
Right. Well, yeah, here's the connective tissue, is that when you're not clinging on to this faith belief idea, and you have the freedom to question, to doubt, there's levity, there's fun. There's even maybe a little loss of ego, because you're not attached to this thing being right or this thing being wrong, that, you can float through the inquiry process. And that's the thing that I've just really found delightful about, the whole Swedenborgian community, is that there is this lightness, this levity, this fun, where we're we're not putting dogma first, right? That if I express some beliefs that are, different from yours, it's not a deal killer. Nobody's getting rattled, because we know that it's not ultimately what our opinions are about these things. And I kind of like bringing it down to that word opinions, because we talk about faith like, oh, I think it's this way and I think it's this way, and it's like, well, these are opinions. These are opinions about our afterlife. I mean, really think your afterlife is going to depend on your opinion? Not to mention the degrees and the changes of that opinion, because so often we talk about beliefs and faith as if they're these absolute things that we ascribe to, and it doesn't. And I think it's our language doesn't allow for the spectrum, and doesn't allow for the nuance. So like, one of the things I like to ask my guests are, do you believe in exorcisms? And you can answer in the form of a percentage. What percent do you believe in exorcisms, right? And I'm usually at 70%. And it would be fun if we, were more regularly expressing our beliefs in things, as a percentage. Because, yeah, when somebody asks me, oh, what do you believe? I'm like, well, I think I believe this, but I don't know. Do I 100% absolutely believe in it? I don't know. Maybe I think I do, but it's only 80%. And, great example I give is this scripture miracle that I had with Reverend Eric Allison. He had just had a stroke. I was asked to give the sermon. I'm like, okay, I guess I need one sentence from the Bible in my sermon, right? So, I come to Jeremiah 2:6, and so when I'm, giving my talk and I read that, John Clowery, one of our Buddhist members, interrupts me, and he says he was with Eric in the hospital the night before reading the Bible to him, and Eric took the Bible from him, flipped through some pages, and pointed to the exact same sentence that I would read the next morning trying to fill Eric's shoes. And that sentence, Jeremiah 2:6, is like, your ancestors refused to ask for my help, even though I took them through the barren desert where no one lives or dares to travel, right? Which is like God saying, oh, I do these miracles for you, but, you'll forget about them. You'll blow them off. And I lived that. So, like, 10 minutes later, I interrupt myself. I'm like, John, are you sure? Because there's something else that sounds a lot like that, right? And so then a few hours later, I'm like, oh my gosh, I did it. I did what the scripture said I would do. And so then, right, then I have to ask myself, wow, this is interesting. Like my faith, belief in the Bible was tremendously escalated as a result of this experience. But if you had asked me the day before, hey, do you believe in the Bible? Do you believe in Jesus? And I'd say, sure. And yet that faith, that belief paled in comparison to what I would feel the next day. I mean, I was thinking about this every day for a year. I was so spun up. So, right. And I hear about, maybe the non-religious or the atheists saying like, oh, if I just had proof, if I just had, an out-of-body experience, or if I saw a ghost or this or that. And my response is like, yeah, you'd believe more, but it's not gonna suddenly, go from black to white and make it like now you totally believe 100% all day, every day. So yeah, that's a part of it.
It's excellent.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I had a question, Mr. Robbins. So for me, I'm still such a noob and I've been learning under Thom Muller, but I haven't had a chance to really talk about these issues with you. So for someone who's still a beginner on the Swedenborgian journey, um, what kind of tips and recommendations would you give to me?
Well, his most popular book is Heaven and Hell. That's the one that I started with, but Divine Love and Wisdom is probably the best. Um, yeah, right.
Go
um,
on.
and it's beautiful. It really is beautiful. I mean, the thing you need to know about reading Swedenborg is that it's very, very dense and it can be a struggle to get through. But I feel like every, 5 to 10 pages, you'll come across this nugget of wisdom that you almost kind of have to stop and put the book down and just process for a minute because it's so amazing. Um, so
Why?
I mean, what's that?
Why is it amazing?
Well, it depends on the quote. So, like the one that I mentioned before, right? When he's talking about the faith of angels, and I just like stop. Like, why do angels need faith? Like, they're there. So, yeah, and there's a lot of things like this that will just kind of stop you in your track. So, I mean, there's a journey of reading Swedenborg and the information insights that come out of it. Um, I would think enjoying the diversity of opinion uh, is a nice thing because yeah, we've got some variety in opinions and it's out there and it's not shunned. Um here's here's a great one. Like for the longest time I felt that almost like an Achilles heel of Swedenborgianism was that he wrote about people on Jupiter. And now we know there's no people on Jupiter, right? Um, and so I would just say, oh, well, I guess, he got that wrong, but, the rest of it makes a lot of sense to me. Recently, though, I've been wondering if this was something that he did deliberately because the readers couldn't fathom other galaxies with alien life forms. And yet somehow he felt it was important to communicate that there is life out of Earth, and maybe he just said, "Look, we'll put them on Jupiter. They'll get the idea. It doesn't matter." But it's kind of things like this that I don't feel creates a huge amount of consternation amongst a group that isn't putting belief, faith as first. And there's so much freedom that comes from that. And I was telling Thom this yesterday. It's like, it's kind of ironic that those that would ascribe to, say, a traditional Satanist philosophy, not the atheist Satanists, but the real ones, right? They would say, "Oh, well, God's trying to keep you down, and we're all about freedom and so forth." But I think it's actually backwards. I mean, in my belief, the the demons, the evil, it wants to dominate. And if it can convince you that, yeah, come to me, I got the cookies. Yeah, come over here. Whereas God has given us this free will, this freedom to rationalize, this freedom to think and form our opinions and change our mind, and put us on this, rather chaotic planet that, has a few signposts about spirituality, not many. But this is something I often think is odd, that we need to live in this chaotic environment supposedly to experience the free will. But it's not completely devoid of signposts, right? We've got, you know, ghosts, near-death experiences, maybe some prophetic dreams. So, you get some people who are like, yeah, there's a God in the spirit world. And you got, atheists who are like, no, it's all nonsense. And that we're in this balance where both of these are, viable opinions, I guess, right? So I think that the freedom to question is so beautiful and vital in the messaging of Swedenborgianism, that, yeah, I would kind of treasure that levity and the openness of conversation. It's really great.
Right, and that's one of the things that I appreciate the most, especially as someone coming from the outside, and have generations of family and all that good stuff, and being able to talk openly and from an intellectual basis, and not feel like I'm saying something blasphemous or speaking out of turn. So that's one of the things that really has made me gravitate towards Swedenborgianism.
Hmm. One more thing on the salvation through faith alone. Well, probably not the last thing, but I was watching a video with a Christian, a Muslim, and a Hindu debate three Satanists. And again, I think these are the traditional Satanists, not the atheist Satanists. But it was no surprise to me that the very first attack that the Satanists lodged was, your God doesn't sound loving. He's going to send me to hell because I didn't believe in him. And I'm like, yeah, see, right. That's the Achilles heel of that form of Christianity. That's the first line of attack for a Satanist, is to pick apart this this mischaracterization of Jesus. That, yeah, it's really unfortunate. In some ways I feel that this scripture miracle that I had with Reverend Eric Allison and John 17 years ago, is given me this freedom to ask these questions and make these statements, because it's more like the Bible has proven itself to me, so I don't have this fragile faith. It's like there's something serious in there that had a connection with me through Reverend Allison. It doesn't mean that the whole book has to be perfect in its entirety. There's something in there. And for the New Testament, yeah, maybe it's the first 4 Gospels and Revelations and, bits and pieces of the Old Testament. It doesn't matter to me too much, like what parts are what, but just the freedom to say, yeah, you know what, some parts of it may be flawed, but that doesn't disrupt this fragile faith I have, because it's proven itself to me.
Right.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love that you mentioned, it's interesting, you mentioned both the question of scripture in general, and some people have this need for infallibility, right? And you mentioned the people on Jupiter question, and it's something I really appreciate. I think it's actually quite central to Swedenborg, is that something can be spiritually true without being literally true, right? So, like when I read Other Planets or Earths in the Universe, is the older translation of it, I'm just like, yeah, I totally believe all of this is spiritually true. I think he really saw this and is making a faithful account of what he's seeing. Does that mean that there are literally people on Jupiter? Probably not. But there's a spiritual significance in imagery, right? And in spatio-temporal depictions of spiritual reality that way transcends and is not dependent on the literal meaning. And I'm very much inclined to apply that to Swedenborg, because I feel like he himself very much promotes that. Is what he's conveying is for the spiritual mind. It's not for the natural mind. The natural stuff is interesting. Are there actual people on Jupiter? But what's much more important is, does this concept, do these images, do these narratives about quote unquote people on Jupiter have an effect on my inner spiritual psyche? Are they reflective of something that is deeply true, independently from time and space? But, kind of to wrap things up, something really important before I forget is for those watching this right now, because they're familiar with ODB and with Spiritual Questers and Swedenborg Room, what would be the best way for someone to follow what you're doing? Where do I go if I'm watching this video and I go, I love crosshatched? How do I stay in touch with you and keep the content flowing?
Right. Yeah. Our biggest community is on YouTube, and it's youtube.com/@crosshatched podcast. Or if you just search Crosshatched Podcast on YouTube, you'll see a logo like that one there, and you will have found us.
And of course, there's your OnlyFans channel.
I'm leaving that in.
I do have a small Facebook group too. But yeah, YouTube is.
I was going to say, yeah, there's a Facebook as well, right?
Yeah.
So if someone were to look there, and what we will do is we will share a link whenever we post this. We'll share a link to some of your stuff as well, so people can have, and I guess we can add that here. Good.
I'll add it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Michael. This has been excellent, and I'm sure this won't be the last time we have this kind of open discussion. In fact, just to give a shout out, I will be in Seattle with Michael in just a few days, and we'll be recording a little service, actually. This will be a Sunday, so stay tuned if you are really into these obscure, perhaps strange conversations we're having. we're excited to have you continue to tune in.
And yeah, speaking of obscure, we're going to see an obscure band on Saturday, and we're both lovers of music, so it's another reason to tune in.
Awesome. I'll have to check that out. And I'm glad that we get to talk more about Swedenborgian stuff, Michael. And it's always great to see your face. And hopefully, your fame will bring in new followers for our podcast as well.
I definitely did not start it for the fame. I kind of thought it was silly how many people were chasing internet fame, but I thought that this is a message that I was really passionate about and wanted to get out there and just hopefully make the world a better place.
Yeah, and
Well,
thank you
that's
for
where it should
doing that,
start.
and thank you for sharing that with us. Yeah.